Hello book lovers and welcome back to our channel. Today I'll be doing a book versus movie comparison. So for this book versus movie comparison, I'll be comparing the book Ruby Red with the movie. I watched the movie in German and I read the book in English, so this video will be in English. So how this video is going to work, I will be telling you guys the plot of the movies and the books, and then I'll be comparing the big differences that were in the movie and the book. So if you have watched the movie and read the book and you just want to see the comparison and the big changes that were made, just jump to this time that will be somewhere here. And just a reminder, there will be spoilers for the books and the movies. So let's get started. I will start with the book and then after that I'll do the movie. Okay, so the book starts with Lucy and Paul, who are both time travelers who have just travelled back in time to 1912, and they are crying about something and discussing their next adventure to the Titanic. Then it goes to Gwyneth, who is the main character. In the English version of the book, her name is Gwyneth, although in the movie and in the German book she is called Gwendolyn. So Gwyneth is at school and she is at school with her best friend Leslie. Charlotte, her cousin, starts feeling dizzy, so Gwen has to bring her home. So the reason why Charlotte feels dizzy is because her family thinks that she will time travel and that she is part of a magical organization called the Lodge of Count Saint Germain. They think that she will be the 12th time traveler in the group and the last one. She has not traveled back yet, but because it is her birthday, or at least she has turned 16, and once you've turned 16 you can start time traveling. You time travel without knowing that you're time traveling, without being able to control it, unless you use a specific instrument called the chronograph. And one of the ways they can sense that they are going to be time traveling is by feeling dizzy. So Charlotte, who has been trained to become a time traveler by the Lodge since she was young, starts feeling dizzy, so Gwen has to bring her home. And in this version of the story, of course, Gwen knows minimal about the time travel. At least she knows that Charlotte is going to be doing it, and that when you feel dizzy, that's when you're going to time travel. In this version of the story, in the books, Gwen can already see ghosts. So one of Gwen's powers is that she can see ghosts, and she has been able to see ghosts since she was very young, and a couple of people know about it. So Leslie, her best friend, knows about it, her mum Grace knows about it, and Charlotte also knows about it with a lot of other people, but a lot of people don't believe her. So don't believe Gwen that she can actually see ghosts. When Gwen gets home, she talks with her great aunt Maddie, and then she gets sent outside to pick up some stuff from the store, and this is when Gwen time travels for the first time. Because the thing is that Gwen is the one who is actually the time traveler. Whilst everyone did believe that it was Charlotte, it's actually Gwen. So she time travels for the first time outside of her house and no one notices, and she tries to get back to her home but travels back before she can knock on the door. So when she goes home, she asks her Aunt Maddie about a couple of questions about the time traveling, and she talks to her friend Leslie, and who tries to get her to talk to her mother. That night, Charlotte feels dizzy again, so she is brought to the lodge by Charlotte's mother and her grandmother, Lady Arista. This family, they all live in one house, so the only person who doesn't live, or the only branch of the family, is Gwen's mum's brother, lives in the countryside, and his daughter, Lucy, is also one of the time travelers. She is number 10, I'm pretty sure. And so this evening, Glenda, who is Charlotte's mother, Charlotte and Lady Arista are not at home. Aunt Maddie, so great Aunt Maddie, she has a vision at dinner, because she can have visions and she can see clues to what the future may be and stuff like that. She has a vision at dinner about a ruby and some other things. That evening, Gwen and Grace talk, and Gwen doesn't tell her mother Grace that she can time travel. That night, Gwen time travels for the second time. This time she travels in her own home and is chased through the house by servants who think she is a thief. And the next day at school, Gwen travels for the third time and she sees her future self kiss a guy who we later find out is Gideon. Once this has happened, Gwen calls her mother and tells her all about it, and then her mother brings her to the lodge where Gwen meets all these new people like Mr. George, Falk de Villiers, and Mr. White. So there's two lines of time travelers in the story. There is the female line and the male line. So the female line is like Gwen and her cousin Lucy, whilst the male line, the whole family is called de Villiers. So the first guy was called Lancelot, and then the last guy is now Gideon, and a lot of the de Villiers work at the lodge. Okay, so basically the goal of the lodge is to collect the blood of all the 12 time travelers, to put it in the machine, the chronograph. Then the secret will be revealed and all humanity will be saved, and that's what it says in the prophecies. What happened in 1994, or 1993 technically, was that Lucy and Paul, Lucy, who is Gwen's cousin, and Paul, who was the second last male time traveler, and Lucy was the second last female time traveler. And so Lucy and Paul have stolen the chronograph because they figured out a secret or something, and then they traveled back in time to escape with it. But the lodge found another working chronograph to control the time travelers' time travel, and so they get Gideon and Gwen to go back into the past and collect all the blood from the past time travelers to put into the chronograph. Gideon has managed to get the blood from most of the past time travelers except for Margaret Tinley, who was third to last female time traveler, Paul de Villiers, Lucy, and another one from a long time ago who he gets blood from really easily. So that's why Gideon and Gwen have to travel back in time to collect the blood from the other people. The people that we meet, out of all of them, Mr. George seems the friendliest, and then Falk seems like alright, and because him and Gwen's mother had like a fling kind of when they were younger, whilst Mr. White, or Dr. White, he is kind of rude towards Gwen. This is also where we meet Gideon de Villiers, who is like the other protagonist in the story. This is where we meet him for the first time, and we find out that this is also the guy who Gwen was kissing in the past. When the lodge tries to find out if Gwen is actually telling the truth, her and Mr. George talk, and Gwen tells Mr. George about her powers, and this is also where she travels for the 4th time, and she finds a key in the past, which she keeps, and she gives it to her best friend Leslie. So she also gets her blood taken here for the chronograph to work, so that she doesn't time travel uncontrollably anymore. And she goes to Madame Rossini, who is the dressmaker for the place, and she overhears Gideon and Charlotte talk about like her not being the time traveler, and then Gideon tells the lodge that he doesn't want to complete the mission with Gwen because it might be too dangerous. Right after this, she goes to meet the Count Saint Germain, who is the founder of the lodge and one of the time travelers as well. So she travels back to the 1800s, where she meets the Count and his, like, I want to say minion, but I feel like that's not the right thing, but like his associate Rakowski and Lord Brompton, who is a man in this time. Gwen in this scene shows them how a phone works because she took a phone in the past and she takes a photo of them. The Count kind of force chokes because he can like read minds, and he does that to Gwen because he doesn't like that Gwen broke his rules about time travel. After this scene, when they are heading back to the lodge to travel back, they are taken to Gideon and Gwen are taken to Hyde Park, where there is a fight scene and Gwen kills a guy. After this, Gwen is really shocked. Gideon tells Gwen to just go home. So the next day, Gideon picks Gwen up from school in a limousine, and it's like a really nice scene. And then they travel back to one of the past time travelers, Margaret Tinley, to collect her blood. They travel back to Margaret Tinley to collect her blood because last time Gideon was there, she refused to give him her blood, and he said that he would only speak to Gwyneth Shepherd. What is interesting about this is that no one knew that Gwen was going to be the 12th time traveler. They all thought it was going to be her cousin Charlotte. So yes, they travel back in time to Margaret Tinley, but they figure out that it is a trap set by Paul and Lucy because the lodge, they still don't know why Lucy and Paul stole the chronographs. And they think that Paul and Lucy just wanted the secret for themselves. and what will happen like once you fill in all 12 time travelers. So they think that Paul and Lucy are just trying to get Gideon and Gwen's blood. So it was a trap set by Paul and Lucy, but Gideon and Gwen managed to escape and they run away to a confessional to hide there. So they are in a church, and then they kiss, and that's the end of the book, except for the epilogue, which is Lucy and Paul, who are talking about Gwen when she was younger, and they are talking about Gideon if he would be good. Once Gwen is at the lodge, she is seeing this little boy following Mr. White around everywhere, and she learns from Mr. George whilst they are talking that is actually Mr. White's son who died when he was younger. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over into the movie, and I feel like this will be a bit quicker because it is a very similar plot to the book. But the movie starts with Lucy and Paul escaping to the past. Then the first scene of the movie is Gwendolyn is at a birthday party for Charlotte, and at this party she meets Gideon, and in this story Gwen is really clumsy and she spills like her drinks on him. After this, Gwen talks to her aunt Maddie, and she learns a little bit about the time travelers before, this is after Charlotte feels dizzy and has to go to the lodge. And the thing is with the books, it kind of just follows Gwen's story, whilst in the movie it like shows what's happening at the lodge when Gwen is at home. So here it shows what they do at the lodge, and it's a bit creepy and all. Anyway, so then after that it shows Gwen at school, and she is feeling kind of dizzy, which is interesting because Charlotte was just feeling dizzy as well. Who would have thought? And so today is her birthday because she is a day after Charlotte, although it is revealed in the book and in the movie that she is actually born the same day as Charlotte, but her mother lied on the birth certificate because she didn't want Gwen to be trained like they trained Charlotte. Yes, and this is where she sees ghosts for the first time, because in the movie she can only see ghosts when she is turned 16. So after this, Gwen also talks to Aunt Maddie, but she doesn't actually believe in any of the time travel stuff. And then she also travels back in time for the first time right in front of her house, and she kind of gets like arrested, and like people are like accusing her of being a thief. And then she walks over and she like travels back in time and travels back to the future and has passed out kind of. And then she wakes up and she goes and talks to Leslie on the phone, and then Leslie tells her to go home and tell her mother. After this, Aunt Maddie has a vision. This is also where Gwen's mother tells her about Lucy and Paul for the first time, because because Lucy and Paul gave her a gift for her birthday, which is like a key. Well, it's a necklace with a key on it. So after this, at night, Gwen has her second time travel, but in this version she meets the grandfather, and her grandfather tells her some information about Lucy and Paul stealing the chronograph, running into the past. And then after this, Gwen calls, like in the morning, Gwen calls Leslie, and they talk about a ball which they are attending that year, which is kind of interesting. And then she travels back in time for the third time and sees herself kiss Gideon. So after this, she calls her mother and she brings her to the lodge. So here she sees this little boy around everywhere who she later finds out is called Robert. And here Gwen meets Gideon and she's really sassy with him. And Mr. George tells Gwen a bit about the time travel stuff before she time travels back for the fourth time. So then in the fourth time travel, she finds a letter for herself, or it's at least addressed to herself, and she doesn't take a key back. And at the same time, it's flashing back whilst Gwen is in the past. It shows the future where Gideon and Charlotte are talking about Charlotte being like lied to and all her life, or like how she couldn't believe that her family did this kind of thing. Once Gwen has traveled back to the future, Gideon tells the Guardians that he can't do this time travel with her because she's just not capable of it. After this, Gwen gets her blood taken by Dr. White and she gets costumes done with Madame Rossini, but Gwen isn't really attracted to the costumes. And then there's a very interesting indoctrination ceremony by the lodge where she gets a signet ring, which she doesn't get in the books. She gets a credit card from the lodge, which she can spend on anything. Then Gwen and Grace talk, and Charlotte talks as well, and then, or the next time she's back at the lodge, she time travels with the chronograph for the first time, but she first overhears Gideon and Falk talking about how he would, or how Gideon should get together with Gwen, which is a very interesting story point. Yes, so then she travels back to Margaret Tinley in 1912, and here again it's a trap with Paul and Lucy, but here Gwen learns that she is wearing the necklace that she is wearing, which is like a key, is Lucy's necklace. Lucy tells Gwen about a prophecy, not like a prophecy about herself, and then Gideon and Gwen manage to run away to a confessional again, but they don't kiss here, I don't think, at least it cuts away before that is shown. I don't think they kiss because, yeah. And then they go and eat Indian and talk about how Lucy and Paul set them a trap. Once they get back to the lodge, Gideon steals this notebook from Falk, which talks a bit about the prophecies, because in the movies, only the Grand Master of the lodge, who is Falk, knows about everything that it says in the prophecies. And then here, Gwen also talks to James, who is the school ghost from the 18th century, and she kind of learns a little bit about him. Then she goes back to the lodge in the afternoon. She gets picked up from school by Gideon again in the limousine, and it's really romantic and stuff. And then she goes back in time to the Count. This is her second time travel with the chronograph, and in this version she also takes her phone and she talks to the Lord Brompton and Mr. Rakowski. Yeah, and she takes a photo of them, and then the Count uses his powers, like his force powers, on Gwen again to choke her, and he tells her not to break his rules. And then they go and have the Hyde Park fight scene, where Gwen also stabs a guy. Gwen is shaken up by this, and Gideon tells her to go home, and he brings her to the door, and then they talk all night, and they're calling and texting, and then Gideon says that she should sneak out with him, and they go to the lodge and they break into the documents room to try and look for the prophecy that Lucy told Gwen about. Here they get locked in the documents room, and they sleep at the lodge, where Mr. George finds them in the morning. After this, Mr. George lets them travel back in time to find the prophecy in the past, and they find a secret clock tower in a courtyard that is kind of blocked off. They find the prophecy in the clock tower, and it says that Gwen should die in the cold, in snow. They are chased up the clock tower, and here Gwen falls out of the clock tower and bleeds on the snow. The little ghost boy, then comes and kind of wakes her up and leads her to a door where she uses Lucy's key to unlock the door. Once she travels back to the future, when she's inside, Falk doesn't let Gideon find Gwen, and he will let Gwen die by hypothermia, because that's what he interprets the prophecy to say. Gideon finds Gwen, and he brings her to the infirmary to help her, and then she wakes up, and they almost kiss, but they don't. After this, Gideon and Gwen kind of flirt, and she tells him about the third time travel that she had, back to where she saw him. She saw her future self kiss him. Gideon and Gwen go to the dance together, and this is where they kiss for the first time. And then in the epilogue, it shows Lucy and Paul being chased, and once they're in the past somewhere, and then they jump off a bridge, and just before they land in the water, they time travel back. So now I'm going to go through and just talk about the big changes that were made between the books and the movies, and what I kind of think about both. So one of the first big changes is where the movie starts and how the characters are introduced. So like I said with the books, it starts off with Gwen at school, and it just shows Charlotte feeling dizzy, and it kind of introduces time travel there. without having to know all the lodge stuff. Whilst in the movie, it kind of shoves all the characters in at once, all the main characters. So we have Gwen, we have Gideon, we have Leslie there as well, we have Charlotte, and it's very full on. And then when Charlotte feels dizzy, she gets brought to the lodge. So in this version, in the movie's version at least, Gwen already knows Gideon, or at least she's met him before, and she finds him like kind of rude and selfish, and she doesn't really like him that much. Whilst in the book, she didn't know him until after she had already seen herself kiss him. And yeah, that's a very interesting change that they made. So then the next big change is that in the movie, Gwen can only see ghosts when she has turned 16. Now, I have a lot of opinions about this, but I just don't think this was a good change that they made for the movie, because in the movie it just makes her feel so much more like she just really didn't believe any of the time travel stuff at all. Like in the book, she could already see ghosts and she knew they were ghosts, so she already believed that there could be something supernatural out there, there could be something weird or different, and that's why she already believed in the time travel stuff before, like time traveling back for the first time, even though she didn't know that much about it. Yeah, also in the movie, she doesn't actually know anything about time travel until Charlotte is dizzy at the party and kind of faints, and that's where Aunt Maddie tells her a bit about the time traveling stuff. One of the biggest changes that happen next I find really important, and that is her second time travel back, where she is still uncontrollably time traveling. And this is where she meets her grandfather in the movie and in the book, while she is chased around by servants who think she is a thief. Now, why this change is so important, I guess, or so difficult to like grasp, is because when she meets her grandfather in the past, in the movie, Lucy and Paul have already escaped with the chronograph. Now, it has been set up in both the movie and the book that there are two main things that have already been set up that this scene kind of breaks, or this scene has to break somehow, or at least it's been set up in the books. So, first thing is that Lucy and Paul only escaped once Gwen was born, and we find that out later as well, but we think it happened like the day that Gwen was born, but we find out later that Lucy and Paul actually escaped like the day after, or like a couple of days later after Gwen was born. But anyway, so one big time travel rule that is immediately set up in the books is that you cannot travel back to a time when you were alive, and in the movie this scene completely breaks that, because Gwen must have already been alive somehow in 1994, which is, so 1994 she was born, Gwen was born, and only after Gwen was born did Lucy and Paul escape to the past. And then after that, sometime, Gwen met her grandfather in the past, who told her about Lucy and Paul escaping. So the timeline kind of doesn't, like, it adds up unless you count the rule that you can't travel back into your own time. So Gwen could not go to her grandfather, who knew about Lucy and Paul time traveling, because she was already born, she was already alive. She could only travel back before that. And this just kind of, it made me really upset, just because the rules that Kerstin Gier has created for this world are just so unique but so interesting, and the way she has written time travel is just so interesting, and the movie just breaks that with this scene. And like, I guess at first you don't really notice it, but then you do. And they could have just fixed this whole scene by not having her meet her grandfather, but before Lucy and Paul escaped into the past, and just had it when Lucy and Paul were fleeing around the country, because we do know that Lucy and Paul stole the chronograph before Gwen was born, and they tried to move around the world and like try and escape the FBI or whoever was following them, and then only once Gwen was born did they escape to the past. Now, they could have just made it that she meets her grandfather, and her grandfather tells her about Lucy and Paul taking the chronograph but not to the past yet. And then her being like, am I alive yet? And she's like, and then her grandfather being like, no, your mother is still pregnant, or something like that. Something that would just fix that whole dilemma. One of the things that also kind of was messed up was the characters at the lodge. So we have Mr. George, Falk, and Mr. White, or Dr. White. In the books, their characters kind of correspond with like their past. Like Mr. George was Gwen's grandfather's like friend, and like a really close friend, and like they worked together and they were like really close, whilst Falk just kind of does what he's told, and he's like just the leader, and he's like nice to Gwen, and he cares about her because he cares about her mother. And then Mr. White is just really rude and grouchy and stuff because he's also Robert, who is the little boy, the little ghost, is also his son. Whilst in the movie, these characters have kind of been swapped around, with Falk being the rude one, and I'm assuming this is also branched off because he was in a relationship with Gwen's mum, so he's rude to her because they were in a relationship and they had a fight or something like that, but they were in a relationship in the past, like a while ago, before Gwen was born, which was 16 years ago, so he should probably get over it or something. And then Mr. White is just kind of alright, like he just doesn't trust Gwen, but that's like the whole depth of his character. Whilst in the book, like he had he didn't really have a reason, but he was like just grouchy, but in a mean way. Whilst in the movie he was just kind of a boring character who wasn't needed, which is why they kind of just removed him in the end, which they didn't in the books because he's still very important in the last book. But I guess that's also because in the movie, Robert, who is the dead boy, or the little boy ghost, is not Mr. White's son, but rather Gwen's grandfather's brother, who died when he was younger. Yeah, so, and the whole, how the lodge treats Gwen with the indoctrination ceremony and the signet ring and the credit card, that just all doesn't happen in the book, which just, because they just try and completely leave her out of the whole time travel stuff and only let her time travel to fill her like time travel quota so she doesn't uncontrollably time travel into the past. But with the book, I feel like it had more reason to it because the Count is such an important character, and like he is kind of the main antagonist of the whole series. Whilst in the book it's kind of like, I guess it's kind of Mr. White because he's just kind of rude, and like the Count of course as well once we meet him, and Lucy and Paul as well in the first one, but again they seem like good characters. Yeah, but like with him having the rule that once the person or the time traveler has first been read into the chronograph, they have to immediately meet him in the past. It just kind of gives him more of a superiority because he can still control the future even though he is in the past and has probably died already. Whilst in the movie they kind of take their time and they kind of just meet him later on when it suits them. Whilst in the book it happens right then, right there, right after she has been read into the chronograph, she has to go. Which is kind of, it's just the whole superiority thing that he has over the characters. In the movie, Gideon is already very, he already suspects something, that the lodge is hiding something from him or something, or like that he can't be trusted with all the prophecies and stuff, and which just doesn't happen in the book. And I guess just because the whole meeting the Count happened and then they went to Lucy and Paul, everything that happens after meeting Lucy and Paul in the past at Margaret Tinley's, which all happens in the second book, they kind of had to show that in the first movie, but they didn't want to reveal it all because they didn't want to just not have any source material for the second movie. Because if they just took that whole plot for the second half of the first movie, then they wouldn't have anything for the second movie. So they kind of had him be suspenseful of Falk and the rest of the lodge, which with him stealing the notebook, but like he didn't really do anything about it. They just found the one prophecy about her dying, with hypothermia and stuff, and like spoiler alert for the rest of the books, she doesn't, or at least she isn't dead by the end, and we don't know what happens afterwards. Like, she might have died from hypothermia when she was like really old, but like we don't know that. At least in the movie we don't know that, and she doesn't die from hypothermia in the movie either, so that's just very interesting. And then after, in the movie, like after they meet Lucy and Paul, that's the end of the first book, which I feel like is a very logical end, because book 1, 2, and 3, they all are just one continuous story, kind of, which has just been split up. Like, you can read the end of the first, like the end of the first book is just, like the second book starts with the end of the first book, and the third book starts with the end of the second book. Whilst in the movie that just doesn't happen, because they have this whole extra element to it with the Gwen and Gideon digging around at the lodge, and they try and find the prophecy, and her just falling from the clock tower and almost dying, but then she doesn't die, and the school dance thing and all of that. So I guess what this ending kind of means for the story is that whilst the books, they all lead on from each other. So like, you can tell that they are all on one timeline, whilst the movie, it ends with a school dance that was nowhere in the book, and it wasn't even alluded to at all, and they just had to add it in there. But the second movie doesn't start from that point. I guess I'll be talking about the second movie and the second book next time if you guys enjoyed this video. But I guess what my main problem was with it was that they tried to make more from what there was in the story. I guess they kind of needed it because there was a problem with there wasn't enough source material, I guess, with the book and for the movie. Like, it wouldn't have been long enough, but I feel like they could have just added in more time travel maybe, or like, I guess, a bit of character development or something like that, instead of just adding in more plot, like more, and like fiddling around with the plot as well, with the swapping of the first time travel with the count and the second time travel, and maybe like following the rules of time travel that have been set by the book in the movie would have been great as well, but like, don't even mention that. If I were to look at the book and the movie, and I were to tell you if I preferred the plot of the book or the plot of the movie, I would have to tell you that whilst the movie was really entertaining, and as a standalone franchise and series that it was inspired by the book, I guess, it is really interesting to watch, and it is a good movie, and it is like well thought out and stuff. But like, if you were to compare it to the book, I just like the book a lot better. I like the way that Kerstin Gier writes it. The characters feel more like relatable, I guess, in the book than in the movie. I just prefer the book to the movie. I just think the book is a lot more enjoyable to read, especially if you read it as a series. So I hope you liked this. I know this video is going to be very long, but I just really wanted to go into detail about this book and the movie because I do like them both, and it is one of my favorite books. If you did enjoy this, make sure to leave it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, and comment down below if you prefer the book or the movie. And if you like this type of video, please let us know, and for my next video in a couple of weeks, I will be looking at the book and the movie of the second book and movie. So that was all for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!